One sentence can erase years of dignity, and she chose to use that sentence on me, in front of everyone I loved. The room was alive with warmth that evening. My family had gathered around the long oak dining table, laughter bouncing off the walls, plates clinking as dishes were passed, and the comforting aroma of roasted chicken and garlic butter filling the air. It was supposed to be one of those nights we remember fondly, the kind where everyone feels connected, safe, and loved. My husband Daniel sat to my right, his hand occasionally brushing against mine as if to reassure me we were united. Across from us sat his sister, Marianne, who had always carried herself with a certain sharpness that bordered on cruelty, though I had convinced myself she was just misunderstood. The conversation flowed easily at first. My father-in-law told one of his old stories, embellished with wild hand gestures that made everyone chuckle. My mother-in-law kept nudging me with her elbow, slipping me extra servings as if I didn't already have enough on my plate. It was noisy, messy, real, the kind of family scene I had wanted so badly since marrying into Daniel's world. For a fleeting moment I thought to myself, this is home. I belong here. But belonging can be shattered in an instant. It happened like a cruel thunderclap that silences a field of crickets. Marianne leaned back in her chair, twirling her wineglass lazily, her lips curling into that smirk I had always tried to ignore. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. With surgical precision, she delivered the line that would slice through me and hang in the air like smoke from a fire that would not be put out. You can't even give him a child. The words fell heavier than any insult I had ever heard, heavier than betrayal, heavier than a slap. My fork slipped from my fingers, clattering against the plate. The sound echoed, but no one dared move. Every eye around the table darted from her face to mine, searching, measuring, pitying. The silence that followed was suffocating. My cheeks burned instantly, my heart pounding against my ribs so hard that I could barely hear myself breathe. Shame flooded through me, a tide that pulled me under before I had the chance to defend myself. In that moment, my body betrayed me. My lips parted as if to speak, but no what person who should have protected me left me naked in that shame. I wanted to scream. I wanted to flip the table, to throw my glass across the room, to remind them all that my worth wasn't tied to whether or not my womb carried life. But instead, I sat there, trembling, smiling faintly, pretending I hadn't heard her at all. Because that's what women are trained to do. Swallow the insult, protect the peace, even if it tears us apart inside. The weight of cultural expectation pressed down on me like an iron chain. In this family, motherhood wasn't just expected, it was celebrated as the pinnacle of womanhood. Every holiday card featured new babies. Every conversation turned toward milestones and milestones yet to come. And there I was, barren soil in a field where fruitfulness was currency. Marianne knew exactly what she was doing. She had always treated me like an outsider, someone who didn't quite deserve her brother. She never said it outright, but her eyes always told the story. You are less. You are lacking. You are not enough. Tonight, though, she finally put it into words. I glanced around the table, desperate for someone to come to my defense, but instead I found avoidance. My father-in-law shifted uncomfortably, reaching for his water glass. My mother-in-law pursed her lips, as if debating whether to interject, but said nothing. My own sister-in-law, Daniel's younger cousin, who had always been sweet to me, lowered her gaze, embarrassed, unwilling to pick sides. It was as though Marianne had thrown me into a pit, and instead of helping me out, they all stood at the edge, peering down, relieved it wasn't them. The humiliation curdled quickly into something hotter, anger. Inside, I screamed, "How dare she? How dare she reduce me to my womb, to something so private, so sacred?" I had never wanted to talk openly about our struggles, not because I was ashamed of myself, but because I knew the cruelty of the world. I knew how people weaponize pain. And here it was, My worst fear manifesting in front of everyone. But anger doesn't sit comfortably.
Someone coughed. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the void where conversation used to be. My mind raced in circles, spinning between shame and suspicion, sadness and fury. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't carry me. I wanted to fight, but my voice refused to rise. And then something shocking happened. My mother-in-law finally spoke, her tone sharp and cold. "Marianne, that was uncalled for." The room shifted instantly. Heads turned toward her. Marianne raised her eyebrows, feigning innocence, shrugging as if she had only pointed out the obvious. "I'm just saying what everyone's been thinking," she muttered. The shame that had been pressing me down now began to twist into something else. Not relief, but reversal. Because in that moment, I realized something. If she was bold enough to say it out loud, then maybe, just maybe, she wasn't speaking from truth, but from jealousy. Jealousy of what, though? That question burned in me as I forced myself to sit taller, as though reclaiming an ounce of the dignity she had tried to snatch away. And slowly, a seed of triumph began to root itself in my chest. If Marianne thought that sentence would break me, she underestimated me. She underestimated the quiet resilience of a woman who had already weathered storms she couldn't imagine. I held her gaze across the table. I didn't speak, not yet, but I let her see that I wasn't crumbling, that the scarlet letter she tried to pin on me would eventually turn into a badge of strength. Because what she didn't know was that her poison had a way of circling back, and sooner than she realized, the venom she dripped into my life would choke her instead. What I didn't know then was that this dinner wasn't the end of my humiliation. It was only the beginning of a battle that would expose secrets darker than I could have imagined. Some women smile in your face but sharpen knives behind your back. She was one of them. That dinner table moment, the sting of her words, kept echoing in my head for days afterward. I couldn't shake the way Marianne looked at me when she said it, that smug little smirk, as if she had been waiting for the right moment to finally release her venom. It haunted me. Not just the cruelty of the sentence itself, but the intent behind it. Words like that don't spill out by accident. They are chosen, sharpened, and delivered with precision. And the truth is, velvet. Everyone in the family seemed to admire her. Marianne was the golden child, the one who had it all. At least that was the story she told the world. She had the perfect suburban life, the big house on the cul-de-sac, 2 picture-perfect children who seemed to walk straight out of a magazine ad, a husband who wore his success like a trophy, and her own reputation as the flawless hostess who could throw parties that rivaled anything you'd see on television. She was envied, praised, constantly admired, and she fed off it. But her admiration came at a cost. Someone always had to be the backdrop to make her shine brighter. And unfortunately, that someone often turned out to be me. It started small, the kind of jabs most people might dismiss. She would compare me to other women in the family. Never outright insults, always delivered with a sweet voice that made it difficult to call her out. "Oh, Jenna makes the most amazing pies, but you probably don't bake, right? You're more of a store-bought girl." Or, "Sarah just bounced back so quickly after her second baby. Don't you just envy women who have that natural glow?" Those comments never sounded cruel on the surface, but the intent was obvious. Every sentence was designed to remind me of what I lacked, what I wasn't. And I began to realize Marianne wasn't competing with me. She was competing against every woman around her. She needed to be the best, the most admired, the most envied. And if that meant tearing me down, she did it without hesitation. The hardest part was how she used her charm to cover her cruelty. To the outside world, Marianne was warm, approachable, even generous. She knew how to tilt her head just right, how to laugh at just the right moment, how to feign sincerity so convincing it could disarm anyone. People loved her. They believed in her perfection. And because of that, no one ever questioned the subtle malice in her words. I started to feel like maybe I was the problem. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was imagining the sharpness in her tone, reading too much into her words. Shame crept in, convincing me that my feelings weren't valid, that I should just toughen up and let it roll off my back. But then there were moments I couldn't ignore. Rumors about me would circulate quietly.
whispered things I knew hadn't come from anyone but her.
That realization brought anger bubbling back into me, the kind I had tried to suppress during that dinner when she humiliated me in front of everyone. It wasn't random. She had planned it, rehearsed it even, waiting for the perfect moment to deliver a blow that would not only humiliate me, but cement her own power in the family hierarchy. I thought back to all the times she had placed herself on a pedestal while nudging me further into the shadows. The way she bragged about her children's grades, her husband's promotions, her latest renovation project. Always a performance, always an audience. And me? I was cast as the foil, the reminder of what lesser looked like. Sadness followed quickly after the anger, as it always does. Because part of me kept asking, why? Why me? What did I ever do to deserve this? I tried so hard to be kind to her, to build a bond, to treat her like a sister instead of just an in-law. I brought her thoughtful gifts. I complimented her. I defended her when others rolled their eyes at her need to show off. And still, she chose to sharpen her knives on me. That sadness weighed heavily on me, and yet, beneath it, suspicion began to creep in like a shadow. People who act that viciously aren't just mean for no reason. They're protecting something. They're hiding something. They attack because they're afraid someone will see their cracks. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that Marianne's obsession with perfection was too intense to be real. No one's life is that polished. No one can maintain that image without something simmering underneath. And suddenly, I couldn't stop myself from wondering, what was she hiding? The tension between us grew sharper with every family gathering. I noticed how her smile sometimes didn't reach her eyes, how her hand gripped her wine glass a little too tightly when the conversation didn't go her way. I noticed the way her husband looked at her sometimes, not with admiration, but with something closer to exhaustion. And I noticed how she clung to her children's achievements as though they were armor, protection against anyone who might look too closely at her own flaws. And then came the first sign, small, almost invisible if you weren't paying attention, but I was paying attention. It was at another family dinner, not long after the night she humiliated me. Marianne excused herself, the secret she had worked so hard to bury. The walls don't just hold up a house, they also hold secrets, if you're willing to listen. After overhearing that panicked phone call in the hallway, I couldn't look at Marianne the same way again. Her smug confidence, her carefully polished image, it all seemed less solid now, like paint hiding cracks in the wall. My humiliation from that dinner still burned fresh, but now there was something else, something sharper pulling at me. Suspicion. She had said words that didn't belong in her perfect little world. If anyone finds out, it'll ruin everything. That wasn't the language of a woman with nothing to hide. That was the voice of someone standing on the edge of exposure, someone who had built a glass castle and was terrified of stones. It gnawed at me, the not knowing. I started to notice things I had brushed off before. Her late arrivals, her hasty exits, the way she clutched her phone like it contained her very lifeline. She laughed louder in front of others, but behind closed doors I caught glimpses of her looking drained, shadows clinging under her eyes. Her smile felt more like a mask the more I studied it. And then came the whispers. The house wasn't soundproof, not even close. At family gatherings, when the night grew late and the clinking of glasses had died down, voices would carry down the hall. Marianne thought she was careful, stepping into corners or slipping outside, but her whispers leaked through the walls. Quiet but distinct enough to piece together if you listened hard enough. I didn't intend to spy at first, but after what she had done to me, after the way she had stripped me bare with one cruel sentence, I couldn't ignore the possibility that she was hiding something that could flip the script. And so, I listened. One night, after everyone else had gone to bed during a holiday visit, I stayed awake in the guest room. The house was silent, the kind of silence where every creak feels amplified. Then I heard it, her voice, low and sharp, slipping through the thin walls. No, I said not now, not yet. My pulse quickened. I held my breath, straining to catch every fragment. You can't call me here. He can't find out. Do you hear me? He cannot know. I froze. He can't find out. Those words replayed in my head like a broken record. Who was he? Her husband? My husband? Someone else entirely? About distracting everyone from herself. The next few weeks only added fuel to that suspicion. I noticed how secrecy seemed to cling to her, almost like her second skin. She never left her phone unattended, carrying it into the bathroom, holding it in her hand even when she cooked. She would disappear during family functions, slipping out for quick calls she brushed off as work stuff or checking on the kids. But the look in her eyes afterward, restless, jittery, like she had narrowly escaped something, betrayed her. I felt torn in two directions. Part of me carried the weight of shame she had saddled me with, the feeling of being less than, of being broken. But another part of me began to sense a shift, a small but undeniable reversal. Because every whisper I caught, every nervous glance of hers, reminded me she wasn't untouchable. She wasn't flawless. And the truth has a way of clawing its way to the surface. Anger kept me alert. Sadness made me question why I was even bothering to listen. But suspicion, that was the thread that kept pulling me forward. I wanted to know what she was hiding. Not just for revenge, though God knows I wanted her to feel the sting of exposure as much as she had made me feel it. I wanted to know because I had been made the scapegoat in this family, and I needed proof that the queen herself wasn't as clean as she pretended. Then came the night that changed everything. We were visiting again, another family dinner that stretched late into the evening. The house eventually settled into its familiar quiet, the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the hallway clock. I was lying in bed, still wide awake, when I heard it again. That voice. Her voice. Whispering. This time I didn't just listen. I got up. My bare feet padded silently against the hardwood floor as I followed the sound, careful not to let the boards creak. I pressed myself against the wall near the staircase, just out of sight, and held my breath. Her words came clearer than before. I told you this can't happen again. If he ever finds out, it'll destroy everything we've built. My skin prickled. My heart hammered against my chest. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself, but then she said the word that made my blood run cold. Pregnant. I nearly gasped out loud. Pregnant. My mind spun wildly.
After that dinner, Marianne's words didn't just live at the table. They seeped into the cracks of my life, echoing in places I never expected, until I could feel their weight in every interaction I had. She had branded me with a single cruel sentence, and suddenly it was as though everyone else had quietly agreed to wear that brand around me too. At first it came in the form of looks, those pitying glances relatives thought I wouldn't notice, eyes that lingered on me too long when babies were passed around the family circle, small smiles that looked more like condolences than warmth. Nobody said anything directly, but silence has its own language, and I was fluent enough to understand. Then came the backhanded advice. You know, if you just relaxed more, maybe it would happen naturally. Or, have you tried drinking herbal teas? My neighbour swore by them. Others recommended specialists, fertility diets, acupuncture. Each word was dressed up as care, but underneath it, every comment screamed the same thing. This is your fault. Fix yourself. I would nod politely, swallow my discomfort, and thank them. But behind my smile, I was screaming, because what they didn't know was that I had already tried everything. The diets, the specialists, the nights of desperate prayer, kneeling by my bed until my knees ached. None of it had changed the outcome. And every time someone offered their solution, it wasn't just advice. It was a reminder that I had failed. The shame of it was unbearable. Marianne's voice echoed in my head like a curse. You can't even give him a child. And now those words seemed to follow me everywhere, stitched into the fabric of my identity, whether I wanted them there or not. But the worst part wasn't how others looked at me. It was how Daniel began to. In the weeks after that dinner, something shifted between us. He wasn't cruel, he didn't yell or accuse, but his silence was louder than any words. He grew distant, retreating into himself in ways I couldn't reach. He came home later from work. When he was home, he buried himself in his phone or the television, nodding absently when I tried to talk. The hand that used to reach for mine at family gatherings now stayed firmly in his lap. I asked him once, late one night as we lay in bed,
From being alone, but from being unseen. To the world, I was Daniel's wife,
the one who hadn't yet produced the children that would complete the picture-perfect family. Inside my home, I was the woman who bore the unspoken burden, who carried the silent blame. There's a cruelty in being blamed for nature, for something beyond your control. It eats away at you, makes you doubt not just your body, but your worth as a person. I began to see myself not as a woman, not as a partner, but as a failure wrapped in skin. I avoided baby showers, ducked out of conversations about parenting, smiled through tears when friends announced their pregnancies. Every joy of theirs became a reminder of my own absence. And yet, beneath the sadness, suspicion lingered. Because while I was suffocating under the weight of a stigma Mary Ann had so proudly thrust on me, I couldn't forget what I had overheard. Her whispers, her panic, that one word, pregnant. It haunted me. The hypocrisy of it. She had branded me in front of everyone as the barren one, the broken one. And yet she was the one whispering secrets into the dark, hiding something that carried the power to ruin her perfect image. That knowledge kept me from collapsing completely under the shame. It was like a small ember glowing inside me, reminding me that Mary Ann's cruelty wasn't strength, it was a smokescreen. She wanted the spotlight off her, so she painted a target on me. And it worked. The tension between us grew unbearable. Every time we were in the same room, I felt her eyes on me, daring me to challenge her, daring me to crack. I stayed quiet, but inside, the anger was building, a storm waiting for its moment. And then came the night that pushed me over the edge. It was another family gathering, the kind that stretched late into the evening with wine glasses scattered across the table and laughter echoing down the hall. I braced myself for the usual pity, the subtle jabs, the sideways glances, but what I wasn't prepared for was her performance. Mary Ann stood at the head of the table, her wine glass raised, her smile wide enough to split her face. She tapped the side of the glass, drawing everyone's attention, commanding the room the way she always did. Didn't just share her pregnancy news, she used it as a weapon. The room erupted the moment Mary Ann announced it. Chairs scraped against the hardwood as relatives jumped up to embrace her, glasses clinked together in a chorus of congratulations, and the chatter rose to a joyful hum that seemed to swallow the entire house. Smiles stretched wide across faces, hands reached for her belly that had barely begun to swell, and she basked in the glow of adoration like a queen crowned before her court. I sat frozen, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, my nails digging into my skin so hard I thought they might break. On the surface, I smiled, clapping with the others, because what else could I do? To resist would only mark me as bitter, jealous, small. But inside, my heart felt like it was being ripped apart piece by piece. I stole a glance at Daniel. He smiled too, though it was thin, tight at the edges, the kind of smile that looked practiced rather than genuine. His hands clapped along with everyone else's, but when I studied his face more closely, I saw it, the shadow behind his eyes, the unease he tried to mask. It wasn't joy I saw there, it was something darker, something heavier. And Mary Ann noticed it too. She didn't just make her announcement, she performed it. Every word, every gesture seemed designed for maximum impact, and I was the intended casualty. Her eyes flicked toward me between hugs, subtle glances that only I seemed to catch. It was as if she was feeding off my discomfort, drinking it in like fine wine. The corners of her mouth would lift ever so slightly when our eyes met, that same smug smirk from the night she humiliated me resurfacing. "Isn't it wonderful?" my mother-in-law beamed, throwing her arms around Mary Ann. "Another baby in the family!" Her eyes glistened with tears of joy, and for a moment I saw the future she imagined. Rocking chairs, lullabies, little feet running across the living room. And where was I in that picture? Nowhere. The favoritism grew instantly, almost like it had been waiting to bloom. Every question, every comment shifted toward Mary Ann. How was she feeling? What cravings did she have? When was her due date? My father-in-law raised his glass in a toast, declaring how proud he was, how blessed they all were.
Her while I sat there barely holding myself together, rage at Daniel's silence, his refusal to defend me, to even acknowledge how much this moment cut me open. But anger always comes with sadness too, because beneath the fury I felt hollow, empty in ways words can't capture. Watching her soak in the affection, I thought of all the nights I had dreamed of being the one to make such an announcement, to see the joy in Daniel's eyes as he told his parents they would be grandparents again. I had imagined that moment 100 times, planned the words, rehearsed the surprise, but instead, I was stuck in my chair, applauding someone else's dream while mourning my own. The weight of it pressed on me like lead. And yet there was still that whisper of suspicion, because I couldn't shake the memory of what I had overheard. The phone call, the panic, the word pregnant laced with fear rather than joy. Marianne wasn't glowing because she was overwhelmed with happiness. She was glowing because she had won. But what if this wasn't the victory it seemed? That thought stayed with me through the rest of the evening. Every congratulatory hug, every laugh that rang out, every toast that lifted her higher. I kept my eyes on her. And the more I watched, the more cracks I began to notice. Her smile was dazzling, yes, but too rehearsed. Her laughter was a shade too sharp, almost brittle at the edges. And when she caught Daniel's gaze across the room, just for a fleeting second, her expression faltered. The mask slipped. I saw it. A flicker of something else. Fear. The tension grew unbearable. I wanted to stand up and scream, to tell everyone what I had overheard, to rip the veil off her perfect little performance. But I couldn't. Not yet. I had no proof, only whispers and suspicions. And if I moved too soon, I would be the one cast as cruel, jealous, desperate to tarnish her joy. So I stayed silent, clapping, smiling, swallowing my pain while my insides twisted into knots. And then came the moment that shook me most of all. As the excitement began to settle, someone asked her casually, "So how far along are you?" There was a pause, just the briefest hesitation. Impossible for me to ignore. That hesitation when she was asked how far along she was replayed in my mind like a film on loop. I knew what I had overheard weeks before, the word she had whispered with such fear into her phone, and I knew the timing didn't line up. The family, blinded by excitement, didn't question a thing. They embraced her story without hesitation, showering her with affection, already making plans for baby showers and nurseries. But I couldn't join them. My suspicion had become a steady drumbeat in my chest, reminding me that something was off, something she didn't want anyone to see. And then, one night, I saw it with my own eyes. It was a Thursday evening, weeks after the announcement. Daniel and I had been invited over for dinner, but by the time dessert was served, I noticed Marianne growing restless. She kept checking her phone under the table, her smile plastered on, but her mind clearly elsewhere. When the plates were cleared, she stood abruptly, claiming she wasn't feeling well and needed to rest. Her husband barely looked up from his conversation, accustomed to her dramatics, it seemed. But something about the way she left didn't sit right with me. I excused myself a few minutes later, pretending I needed some air. When I stepped outside, the cool night wrapped around me, and that's when I saw her, slipping into her car at the end of the driveway, dressed not in pajamas or lounge clothes as you'd expect from someone claiming to feel unwell, but in a fitted dress and heels, her hair freshly brushed, lips painted with a sheen that caught the glow of the streetlights. My pulse quickened. Curiosity gripped me so tightly I couldn't breathe. Without thinking, I hurried back inside, grabbed my purse and told Daniel I'd forgotten something at home and needed to step out for a bit. My voice shook as I said it, but he barely registered, too deep in conversation with his father. That gave me cover. I slipped into my car and waited until Marianne's taillights appeared at the end of the street before quietly following. My hands trembled against the steering wheel, my stomach twisted with anticipation. 1,000 thoughts raced through my mind. Was she?
My stomach dropped. He was tall, sharply dressed, carrying himself with the confidence of someone who knew he was wanted. His face lit up the moment he saw her, and hers did too, but not with the polite smile she wore for family, not with the smug grin she saved for me. This was different. This was soft, intimate, tender. They embraced, and it wasn't the kind of hug you give a friend or a colleague. It lingered, her head tilted toward his chest, his hand pressed against the small of her back as though it belonged there. They sat down at a table tucked in the corner, leaning in close, their heads tilted together, hands brushing in ways that screamed familiarity. Shock coursed through me, hot and cold, all at once. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened, my eyes glued to them through the cafe's window. I wanted to look away, but I couldn't. Every gesture between them spoke louder than words. This wasn't new. This wasn't accidental. This was a secret life unfolding in front of me. Humiliation twisted inside me because suddenly I understood why she had worked so hard to brand me as broken, as infertile, as less. If people were busy staring at me, they wouldn't look too closely at her. She had painted me as the family's disappointment so she could keep her own sins hidden. But shame quickly gave way to anger, white, hot anger, because here she was, glowing in the family's praise, carrying a pregnancy she had paraded as triumph, while slipping into the night to meet a man who wasn't her husband. And I, the woman she had humiliated, now held the proof of her hypocrisy in my hands. I pulled out my phone, my hands trembling so violently I nearly dropped it, and snapped a photo. The screen lit up with the image. Marianne leaning across the table, her hand resting over his eyes locked onto hers with a gaze that was far too familiar, far too intimate. Sadness washed over me next, heavy and suffocating, because this wasn't just her secret. This was a ticking time bomb, one that would devastate not just her husband, but the entire family who adored her so blindly. And I, of all people, was now the keeper of it. The tension inside me was unbearable. Part of me wanted to march into that cafe, slam the photo on the table, and watch her perfect little world implode. Another part of me wanted to run. Carrying fire. It burns you while you try to hold it. After that night at the cafe, when I captured Marianne leaning across the table toward a man who wasn't her husband, my entire reality shifted. I thought the humiliation she had inflicted on me was unbearable, but this secret, this living, breathing proof of her betrayal, felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. It wasn't just knowledge, it was a weapon, and the dilemma was tearing me apart. If I spoke, I risked being branded jealous, bitter, desperate to tarnish her glow. Everyone already pitied me, already believed I was fragile, defined by what I lacked. To reveal Marianne's secret would look less like truth and more like revenge. And Marianne was too clever, too skilled in the art of performance to let my words stand on their own. She would turn the family against me, painting herself as the victim of my supposed envy. But if I stayed silent, she won. She would continue to bask in admiration, continue to wield her cruelty against me, while living a double life that mocked everything the family believed about her. Silence meant complicity. Silence meant letting her venom spread unchecked. The fire of the truth seared me from the inside out. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the photo glowing in my mind as vividly as it did on my phone. I replayed her laughter, the touch of her hand on his, the intimate ease between them. And each time, the question gnawed at me. What do I do with this? I tried to confide in Daniel. One night, while he sat on the edge of the bed scrolling through his phone, I gathered the courage to speak. "I saw Marianne," I whispered, my voice trembling, "with another man, not her husband." He froze, then slowly lowered the phone, his eyes heavy with something I couldn't quite read. "What do you mean?" he asked. I explained, every detail tumbling out of me in a rush. The late-night exit, the cafe, the photo. My voice cracked as I held out my phone to him, showing him the image that had burned itself into my soul. He studied it for a long time, his face unreadable, before finally shaking his head. "You can't tell anyone," he said flatly. The word stunned me. "What? Why not?" "Because," he sighed, rubbing his temples, "this will only hit her. It hits everyone.
including us. I turned away, tears stinging my eyes. He wasn't wrong, but that didn't make the weight any easier to bear. Days stretched into weeks, and the mental toll of secrecy gnawed at me. Every family gathering became torture. I sat through dinners where Marianne was praised, watched as relatives doted on her growing belly, listened as they planned celebrations in her honor. And all the while, I kept her secret locked in my chest like a live grenade, ticking louder with every passing second. The loneliness was suffocating. I wanted to scream the truth, to peel back her mask and show the world the hypocrisy beneath it. But fear paralyzed me. Fear that I would be accused of making it up, of fabricating a story to mask my own bitterness. Fear that the photo wasn't enough, that she would twist the narrative, say it was innocent, say I was unstable. Fear that in speaking, I would lose what little standing I had left in this family. Suspicion never left me, though. I watched her more closely than ever. Every move she made, every phone call she took, every glance she cast toward her husband or away from him. I was convinced that if she was hiding this much, there was more. Secrets have a way of multiplying, breeding in the shadows. The tension inside me built like a storm, pressing harder and harder against my ribs until I thought I would burst. I began to withdraw, not just from Marianne, but from everyone. I couldn't play along anymore, couldn't fake the joy when the family fawned over her. But I also couldn't expose what I knew. I was trapped in a purgatory of silence and truth, both choices burning me in different ways. And then, just when I thought the weight might crush me entirely, fate intervened. One afternoon, we gathered at Marianne's house for a casual lunch. She flitted around the kitchen, hosting as she always did, laughing too loudly, smiling too brightly. But then she excused herself to answer a phone call, leaving her purse behind on the counter. I shouldn't have looked. I knew that. But my eyes drifted, almost against my will, to the bag she had left open. And there, peeking out,
A way of slipping through the cracks, even in families that pride themselves on appearances. I didn't start the rumors. I didn't have to. They floated in the air like smoke, faint, but impossible to ignore. It began innocently enough. A relative commented that the baby's eyes didn't resemble his father's. Someone else noted that the skin tone seemed a shade off. Another remarked how unusual it was for a newborn to carry no visible trace of paternal resemblance. At first, people dismissed it as idle chatter, the careless talk of relatives with too much time. But the more I heard, the clearer it became. I wasn't the only one who suspected something. Others had noticed, and that emboldened me. For months, I had carried the weight of Marianne's secret rendezvous like a stone strapped to my chest. I had the photo of her in that cafe, the knowledge of her whispers, the inconsistencies in her pregnancy timeline. But proof? Proof was slippery. Proof was what she could deny, and in a family that worshipped her perfection, denial might have been enough to protect her. But science couldn't be denied. Science didn't bend to charm or manipulation. That realization planted a seed in my mind that both terrified and electrified me. A DNA test. The thought alone made my pulse race. To pursue it meant stepping into dangerous territory. It meant crossing boundaries I had never imagined I'd approach. It meant that if I was caught, I would be painted not as the truth teller, but as the villain, the jealous, desperate woman who couldn't bear her sister-in-law's happiness. And yet, the whispers gave me courage. The doubt wasn't mine alone anymore. It was out there, spreading quietly, gathering strength. And if Marianne thought she could hide behind her glittering mask forever, she was wrong. I began planning in silence, my mind racing through possibilities late into the night when Daniel slept beside me. Could I get something as small as a baby's bottle, a pacifier, a strand of hair from a brush? My hands shook as I considered it. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was survival. Because the truth wasn't just about exposing Marianne. It was about reclaiming myself. Every time I looked at her basking in admiration, I felt the scar of her words sear deeper. You can't even give him a child. If she had used a lie to humiliate me, then I would use the truth to dismantle. But the fire inside me burned hotter than fear. That night,
I sat at the kitchen table with the bagged bottle before me, staring at it as though it might explode. Daniel walked in, frowning. "What's that?" I looked up, my throat dry. It's proof." He didn't ask further. Maybe he didn't want to know. Maybe silence was his way of surviving. But I couldn't live in silence anymore. The process of arranging the test was painstaking and terrifying. I researched discrete labs online, reading reviews in the dark of night, my heart pounding each time I clicked a link. Finally, I found one. Reputable, confidential, efficient. I wrapped the sample carefully, mailed it off, and then the waiting began. Those days stretched into eternity. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach flipped. Sleep became a stranger. I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, haunted by two possibilities: that the baby was her husband's, and I had become a monster chasing shadows, or that the baby wasn't, and I was holding the detonator to a bomb that would obliterate everything. The shame of my actions gnawed at me. What kind of person steals from a child, sends it off to strangers, prays for results that might destroy an entire family? But the anger fueled me too. The memory of her smirk, the sting of her words, the nights I cried alone because of the stain she branded on me. Sadness and suspicion warred inside me until I barely recognized myself. The tension was unbearable. I avoided Marianne, terrified my face would betray me. I kept my distance at gatherings, my body coiled tight as I waited for the storm that hadn't yet come. And then, one morning, the email arrived. My hands shook as I opened it, my vision blurring with tears I hadn't realized were forming. The subject line was clinical, sterile, devoid of drama, but I knew what it contained. Science. Truth. The thing Marianne couldn't manipulate or disguise. I clicked. The screen filled with the report, the words sharp and cold, numbers and percentages laid out with devastating clarity. And in that moment, holding my phone, my hands trembling uncontrollably, I realized the truth I had uncovered wasn't just shocking. It was about to change.
Flickered through my mind, and for the first time, I didn't feel crushed under them. I felt powerful. I held the truth. I held proof. And yet, dread shadowed that power, because truth isn't just a light, it's a fire. Once you release it, you can't control what it burns. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine the fallout. Marianne's husband, blindsided. The family, shocked, devastated, betrayed. The baby, innocent, forever caught in a storm he didn't create. And me, standing at the center of it all, the bearer of truth, but also, inevitably, the target of blame. Because no matter how damning the report, I knew Marianne would never go down without a fight. She would twist, manipulate, sob, and scream until people began to wonder if perhaps I was the villain after all. Humiliation had once left me voiceless at that dinner table, but now it whispered inside me, urging caution. Anger told me to stand up, to slam the report down in front of everyone, and finally watch Marianne squirm. Sadness told me the timing mattered, that exposure in the wrong way could destroy more than just her. Suspicion reminded me she might already be weaving her own story, preparing for the day her lies unraveled. I was torn in two. Every part of me longed for justice, but another part feared what justice would cost. Because once this truth was spoken, there would be no going back. So I made a choice. I would wait. It wasn't cowardice, it was strategy. Marianne's life was a house built on lies, and lies collapse under their own weight. I didn't have to swing the hammer. I just had to wait for the cracks to widen, for the walls to shake. And when they did, I would be ready, report in hand, to ensure she couldn't rebuild her mask. But waiting carried its own torment. I lived each day in a strange limbo, carrying a secret that could change lives, pretending nothing had shifted when everything had. I went to family dinners where Marianne preened and glowed, her husband doting, her parents-in-law beaming with pride. I smiled, nodded, played along, all while the truth burned inside me like a brand. There were nights I nearly broke, nights when the injustice screamed too loudly in my ears,
when the image of her smirking across the dinner table
carefully. She slipped away for phone calls still. Her eyes darted nervously at times. Her husband's patience seemed to fray around the edges, though he said nothing. I began to wonder if perhaps he sensed the truth already, if the seed of doubt had planted itself in his heart the way it had in mine long before proof arrived. The tension was unbearable. I moved through life like a woman walking across thin ice, waiting for the crack that would plunge everything into chaos. And then, as if the universe had grown impatient with my hesitation, life decided to act before I did. It happened suddenly, without warning, at another family gathering. Marianne arrived late, flustered, her smile tighter than usual. Her husband followed behind her, his jaw clenched, his eyes dark. Something hung in the air that no one could name yet, but everyone felt. A heaviness, a charge, like the sky before a storm. Dinner passed awkwardly. Conversation stilted. Marianne trying too hard to fill the silences with laughter that rang hollow. My heart pounded as I watched, sensing the crack widening, the house of lies beginning to tremble. And then it happened. Her husband slammed his glass down, the sound sharp enough to silence the room. His eyes cut toward Marianne, his voice low but shaking with fury. "Tell them!" The room froze. Marianne's face blanched, her lips parting as though to protest, to deflect, to charm her way out as she always did. But no words came. Only silence, thick and suffocating. And in that silence I realized the truth I had been waiting to reveal wasn't mine to unleash anymore. It had already broken free, and the storm was about to hit faster than I ever expected. Sometimes fate holds the pen, and writes justice in the most unexpected places. After her husband's furious demand at the dinner table, "Tell them!" the family atmosphere grew unbearably tense. But Marianne, slippery as ever, found ways to stall. She smiled, she deflected, she insisted he was overreacting, that he was tired, that they should discuss things privately. She bought herself time, weaving her words like silk threads over a widening crack in her world. But fate doesn't wait for liars. Professionalism and unease. I noticed the whispers first. 2 nurses at the desk, heads bent together, their voices low but urgent. Then a doctor joined them, flipping through a chart, frowning, double-checking. Suspicion prickled through me. Hospitals don't whisper over routine matters. Something was wrong, not with Marianne's body, but with her story. Finally, one of the nurses approached her husband, asking him to confirm some information for the file. His brow furrowed, his voice sharp with confusion. He repeated his name, his birth date, his details. And then, loud enough for everyone in the waiting area to hear, he snapped, "Why does it say otherwise?" The room went still. My stomach lurched. I watched as the nurse shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the chart in her hands. "It seems there may have been a mix-up," she said carefully. But her voice betrayed more than a mix-up. It was hesitation, the kind of hesitation that hinted at something deeper, something damning. Marianne's husband demanded to see the file. He snatched it from the nurse's hands, his eyes scanning rapidly, his face draining of color as he read. Then his jaw tightened, his hand trembling as he shoved the papers back at her. "Get the doctor," he barked. The family began murmuring in confusion, their voices overlapping. "What's going on? What does it say? Is she okay?" Their concern was genuine, but beneath it I felt the shift, suspicion bleeding into the air like ink on paper. I leaned forward, my heart hammering, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. I didn't need to see the file to know. Science had already told me what the hospital was now revealing by accident. The father's name listed on the record wasn't her husband's. The whispers among the staff grew louder. Nurses exchanged glances, doctors double-checked the details, and Marianne, pale and sweating in her hospital bed, grew restless. Her smile cracked. Her voice shook as she demanded water, as she insisted this was all a clerical mistake, a misunderstanding. But misunderstandings don't leave entire medical teams whispering in corners. Sadness welled up in me unexpectedly. Not for Marianne. She had chosen her lies, sharpened her cruelty, built her life on deception. But for the family, who sat wide-eyed in those stiff hospital chairs, their trust unraveling stitch by stitch. They had adored her, defended her, celebrated her. And now the foundations of that love were shaking. Anger smoldered, whispered furiously to each other, their voices sharp, their gazes darting toward me at times, as though I might somehow hold answers. I kept my face still, my voice silent, even as triumph flickered faintly inside me. Because this wasn't my doing. This was fate. And then, as the doctor entered the room holding the corrected file, the air shifted entirely. His voice was calm, steady, but the weight of his words pressed down on all of us. "We verified the records," he said. There was no clerical error. The silence that followed was deafening. My pulse roared in my ears, and in that silence I realized the storm I had been waiting for was here at last, because the father's identity was about to be announced, and Marianne's lies could no longer hold. Families don't just break quietly. They explode like glass under pressure. The hospital revelation lingered like a storm cloud, heavy and electric until it finally burst. The very next family gathering became the battlefield where years of lies, whispers, and suspicions collided. It was supposed to be a dinner, something ordinary, something familiar, but nothing about that night remained ordinary. From the moment we sat down, the tension was unbearable. No one laughed, no one shared cheerful stories. Conversations that usually flowed freely now stuttered and stalled. Eyes darted toward Marianne and her husband, then quickly away. The clink of silverware against plates filled the silence more than words did. Her husband sat stiff, his jaw locked so tightly I thought his teeth might shatter. His hands never left the table, clenched into fists that made the veins in his arms bulge. He had barely looked at her since the hospital, and when he did, it was with a gaze that burned hotter than fire. Her parents shifted uncomfortably, their faces pale, their hands wringing napkins into knots. They had been so proud, so quick to parade her as their golden child. Now, doubt and shame weighed them down like chains. Finally, he broke the silence. Marianne's husband slammed his hand against the table, rattling glasses and silverware. His voice cut through the air like a blade. Tell them who the father is." The room erupted instantly. Gasps, questions, shouts. Her parents demanded explanations, their voices overlapping, raw with disbelief. "Cousins, I can't stand that I have what she doesn't." Humiliation burned hot in my veins, but this time it didn't silence me. It ignited me, because I had spent too long swallowing her cruelty, too long carrying shame that didn't belong to me. And now, with the family staring, with the walls closing in, I realized the moment I had been waiting for was here. Slowly, deliberately, I stood. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what I was about to do. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and laid it flat on the table. The screen glowed with the photograph I had carried for months. Marianne in that cafe, leaning across the table toward the man who wasn't her husband, her smile intimate, her hand covering his. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." Marianne's face drained of color. She lunged forward as though she could snatch the phone from the table, but her husband's hand shot out, stopping her mid-motion. He stared at the screen, his face hardening with every second, every detail confirming what he had begun to suspect long before tonight. I spoke then, my voice steady, clear, stronger than I thought possible. "I didn't invent this. I didn't twist it. I've been silent because I knew how much it would hurt this family. But she branded me. She humiliated me. She called me broken, when all along she was hiding something far worse." The room buzzed with voices again. Relatives whispering, some defending me, others demanding Marianne explain herself. Her parents' eyes filled with tears, their bodies trembling as they clutched each other. Marianne's chest heaved, her eyes wild, darting between faces that no longer looked at her with admiration, but with suspicion, even disgust. She stammered excuses, fragments of sentences, but the walls she had built were collapsing too fast to hold. Her husband slammed the photo back on the table, his voice shaking with rage. "Who is he?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Everyone froze, waiting for her to answer. And that's when Marianne snapped. Her face twisted with fury, her voice rising into a scream that silenced the entire room. What she shouted in that moment didn't over each other. She spun wildly, appealing to anyone who would meet her gaze. Don't you see? She planted this. She probably tampered with my records, paid someone to fake a test, anything to make me look bad because she can't stand that I'm the one who gave this family a child. The irony of that sentence nearly knocked the breath out of me. For so long, she had used my inability to conceive as a weapon, and now she was twisting it again, trying to paint me as the villain, the schemer, the bitter, barren woman out for revenge. Some of the relatives shifted uneasily, their eyes flicking between us. Doubt, confusion, fear, it was all written across their faces. This was the chaos Marianne thrived on, the fog she had always used to obscure the truth. For a moment, I felt the humiliation rise again, hot and suffocating, threatening to choke me as it had that night at the dinner table when she first branded me. But not this time. This time, I stood taller. I let her venom spill into the room, let her scream and shriek, and then I calmly reached for my phone again. With one swipe, the photo reappeared, glowing against the dim light of the dining room. Marianne's hand over his, their faces inches apart in that cafe. This, I said, my voice steady, isn't a hospital error. This isn't sabotage. This is your life, your secret, your lies. Gasps rippled again. The photo, undeniable, glared back at them. I went further. My hands shook as I pulled out the folded DNA report I had carried for weeks, the paper creased from being opened and closed so many times in my anxious hands. I laid it on the table beside the phone, my heart pounding so hard I thought the sound would drown out my words. The hospital didn't make a mistake, I continued, my voice louder now, stronger, fueled by months of silence breaking free. The science didn't lie. The timelines didn't lie. The whispers you all ignored didn't lie. She's been deceiving you. She's been deceiving all of us. Marianne's face twisted, her eyes wild as she lunged toward the papers, but her husband slammed his hand down first, pinning them to the table. His face was white with rage, his knuckles pale against the wood. Enough, he hissed. You made me the villain to keep your own secrets hidden, but now the mask is gone. The tension was unbearable. Everyone was talking at once, some demanding answers, some trying to calm others down, some simply staring in stunned silence. Marianne stood in the center, her arms flailing, her words growing more incoherent by the second. And then the shock came. The front door creaked open. Footsteps echoed against the hardwood. Conversation froze mid-sentence. Heads turned in unison. A man stepped into the doorway. Not just any man, the man from the cafe. The man from my photograph. My heart lurched into my throat. His presence filled the room like a bomb waiting to detonate. Marianne's face went white, her mouth opening and closing like she'd forgotten how to breathe. And in that instant, before a single word left his lips, I knew. The truth wasn't just cornering her anymore. It was standing in the doorway, ready to expose everything she had tried so desperately to deny. He wasn't just a stranger. He was the missing puzzle piece that made everything fall into place. The moment he stepped through the doorway, the entire house seemed to inhale and hold its breath. His presence wasn't just a disruption. It was confirmation. The whispers, the late-night phone calls, the nervous glances, the timelines that didn't add up. All of it suddenly made sense. He wasn't a shadow anymore. He was flesh and blood, standing in the center of our storm. He didn't hesitate. He didn't shrink beneath the stares or scramble for excuses the way Marianne had. His voice was steady, his eyes unflinching as he looked directly at her husband. It's true, we've been seeing each other. The words dropped like an earthquake, shaking the foundation of the family. Gasps tore through the room. Her mother let out a broken sob, clutching her chest. Her father pushed back from the table, his face ashen, his hand trembling as he gripped the arm of his chair. Cousins exchanged stunned glances, their mouths hanging open, disbelief painted across their faces. And Marianne, for once, was silent. Her mouth opened as if to speak, but nothing came out. She turned pale, her body swaying as though the ground beneath her had shifted. The denial that had carried her for so long crumbled, brick by brick, until
To ruin me. She spun toward her lover, her eyes wide, her voice frantic. Tell them! Tell them you're making this up! But the man didn't flinch.
He stood his ground, his gaze steady, his silence louder than her screams. Humiliation consumed her. She had spent years branding me, mocking me, weaponizing her false perfection against me, and now she stood branded herself, marked by her own deceit. The family stares, once adoring, now cut her to pieces. She tried to gather herself, to spin another story, but no words could compete with the truth spoken aloud. For me, it was a strange mix of emotions. There was relief, a quiet, steady relief that didn't come with celebration or triumph, but with release. The truth was no longer mine to carry alone. It stood on its own now, undeniable, untwisting all the knots Marianne had tied around me. There was sadness, too. Not for her. She had chosen her path. She had sharpened her knives and used them freely. But for the wreckage she left behind. For her husband, whose face was a portrait of devastation. For her parents, who sat hollow-eyed, unable to reconcile the daughter they thought they knew with the woman standing before them. For the baby, innocent and undeserving of the chaos swirling around him. And yet beneath it all, there was anger still. Anger at how long it had taken, how much pain she had inflicted before this moment of exposure. Anger that I had been forced to carry her secret in silence, to live under the weight of her cruelty while she pretended to shine. The tension in the room was suffocating. Everyone was speaking at once, voices rising and colliding until the sound became a roar of disbelief, grief, and fury. Marianne stood in the middle, her hands trembling, her eyes darting wildly, searching for an ally and finding none. Her husband stepped forward, his voice sharp, cutting through the chaos. "Whose child is it?" The question silenced everyone instantly. Marianne's lips parted, but her lover spoke first. His voice was low, steady, unshakable. "He's mine." The air left the room. It was as though the walls themselves had caved in, the floor giving way beneath us. Her husband staggered back, his face contorting with rage and devastation. Her mother carried through the room like thunder, and what he revealed next didn't just shift the focus away from Marianne. It left me stunned, my own world suddenly teetering on the edge of collapse. Sometimes the most powerful words are the ones said after years of silence. For so long, Daniel's silence had cut me deeper than Marianne's insults ever could. At that dinner table, when she branded me barren, when whispers followed me through the family like shadows, when I uncovered the truth and held it trembling in my hands, Daniel had been quiet. His silence had been a wound I carried in secret, a wound I thought might never heal. But on that night, after Marianne's lover confessed, after the truth stood undeniable in the center of the room, Daniel finally spoke. He rose slowly from his chair, his movements deliberate, his face unreadable. The chatter in the room stilled, all eyes turning toward him. His voice, when it came, wasn't loud, but it carried with a weight that silenced even Marianne's sobs. "I always trusted her," he said, his gaze falling on me. The words hit me like a tide. My breath caught in my throat, my chest tightening. Trusted me. Not Marianne. Not the family's golden daughter. Me. After all the humiliation, all the doubt that had poisoned me in the dark, he said the words I had needed to hear for years. He turned then, his eyes sweeping across the room, landing finally on Marianne. "And I always suspected you." Gasps rippled through the family. Marianne's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "What?" she shrieked. Daniel's voice stayed steady, calm in a way that cut deeper than shouting ever could. "You've been cruel to her since the day she married me. You've compared her, mocked her, made her feel less. I stayed quiet because I thought it wasn't my place to start family wars. But deep down, I knew. I saw the way you looked at her. I saw the way you tried to cover your own lies by destroying her dignity. And tonight, everything I suspected is standing right here in front of us." Tears welled in my eyes, not just from relief, but from the ache of hearing it so late. I wanted to scream, "Why didn't you say this sooner?" But another part of me clung to the comfort of finally hearing it at all.
Wasn't the scapegoat. I wasn't the target. I wasn't the broken one in the room. Daniel took a deep breath,
his shoulders straightening as though a decision had crystallized inside him. "From this moment on," he said, his voice firm, "you're cut off. I won't stand by and let you poison this family any longer. You've lied, cheated, humiliated, and destroyed trust. And for me, for us, this is the end." Her mother gasped. Her father shook his head, his face carved with grief. Marianne collapsed into sobs, her lover hovering awkwardly near the door, unsure whether to stay or flee. But Daniel's voice cut through it all, steady and final. "You're no longer welcome in our lives." Shock rippled again. Some relatives nodded, murmuring in agreement, while others stared in stunned silence, unable to process the magnitude of what had just been declared. I sat frozen, my heart pounding, relief and disbelief tangling inside me. Daniel's words were a shield I had longed for, a defense I had begged for in silence, and now they stood between me and the woman who had branded me. But before I could fully absorb the moment, before I could let the relief settle into my bones, Daniel turned back toward me. His eyes softened, but his words, when they came, shook the foundation of the room. Because his final words that night didn't just close the chapter on Marianne's lies. They brought the house down around all of us. They called me infertile, but in the end, I was the one reborn. When the dust settled, when the shouting quieted, and the storm finally began to pass, I found myself sitting in silence, staring at the broken pieces of a family that would never look the same again. Marianne had been unmasked, her lover exposed, her lies scattered across the floor like shards of glass. Daniel's voice still echoed in my ears, his choice, his defense, his decision to cut her out. For years, silence had weighed on me like chains, but now the truth had rung louder than all the lies combined. And in that silence, something inside me shifted. For so long, my life had been defined by humiliation, by that night at the dinner table when Marianne's words stripped me bare in front of everyone I loved, by the pitying glances, the whispered advice, the shame that clung to me like a shadow.
Their daughter and shame for her actions. They no longer looked at me with pity, but with quiet remorse. Some relatives avoided me entirely, unable to face the part they had played in believing her lies. Others reached out, apologizing, confessing their regret for doubting me. But I didn't need their apologies anymore. I had carried the burden of their judgment for too long to keep begging for their acceptance. My worth had never been theirs to grant, and now I knew it. Daniel and I were not magically healed overnight. Years of silence don't vanish with a single declaration. But his defense of me that night planted something new between us, a fragile but real trust. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. He admitted he had suspected Marianne's cruelty all along, that he had stayed quiet to keep the peace, not realizing the cost it had taken on me. His regret was heavy, but his honesty was a step toward rebuilding. And me? I began to heal. I stopped shrinking under pity. I stopped apologizing for something beyond my control. I stopped letting shame dictate the way I walked into a room. For the first time in years, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw not what I lacked, but what I carried: resilience, courage, strength. Marianne had tried to brand me as infertile, as less than, as broken. But in the end, it was her lies that made her barren. Barren of trust, barren of love, barren of respect. And me? I was full again, not with children, but with truth, with the power of my own voice, with the knowledge that dignity can be shattered in an instant, but it can also be reclaimed, piece by piece, until it shines stronger than before. The family would never return to what it was. Gatherings became quieter, smaller. Her absence was a wound no one could ignore, but neither could anyone deny the relief that came with it. There was no more venom slipped into conversations, no more calculated comparisons, no more spotlight cast on me as the scapegoat. I finally breathed freely. I had learned the hardest truth of all. Sometimes justice doesn't roar in with grand gestures. Sometimes it builds quietly, patiently, beneath the surface, until the day it can no longer be denied. And when it comes, it doesn't just expose lies, it restores what was taken. I was no longer the woman who sat in silence,
But in the end, I was the one reborn. If this story hit home, tap like.
and tell me in the comments which moment changed everything for you. Share this video with someone who needs the reminder that truth always wins. Subscribe for more first-person betrayal to justice stories every week. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next reveal. And if you're still here, watch the next story queued on your screen. Your jaw will drop in the first minute.